Welcome to the Grove Podcast, where we feature Evergreen members and their real-life stories of salvation, transformation, struggle, and hope. I'm Joy Gabbert, and today we're going to do things a little differently, and my husband and I are going to share our testimony, so there won't be anybody moving the interview forward. It's just going to be him and I. So say hello to Andrew Gabbert.
Let's do it.
Okay, so why don't you start by sharing with everybody a little bit about our family and where we each serve.
So I am the director of media at Evergreen. I've been on staff for 4.5 years now. We have 4 children, and they are ages 11 down to 6 currently. We've been married for coming up on 13 years.
Yeah, so I serve a lot on the worship team, and I also serve in this capacity of helping to tell people's testimonies on the Grove and get those stories out to all of you guys who are listening today.
Why don't you kick us off and tell us about your childhood?
So I grew up, I am the youngest of 3. I was born in New Hampshire, and I grew up in a very normal American family. We were also a Christian family, and being the youngest, I kind of just took whatever my sisters were doing, and I would want to do it too. And but when it was 1994 when we left New Hampshire and ended up moving to Colorado, where my mom was from. And shortly after we moved, Easter was coming up, and my family decided to go and attend the Passion Play of Denver, which is a theater performance starting at the triumphal entry of Jesus' life and going through the crucifixion and resurrection. And so at the time I was 4 years old, and I remember sitting in the audience and being really drawn in by the story. I already knew the story because I had heard it a lot in church. My parents had told me, my Sunday school teachers had told me, but seeing it come to life on stage was just really different for me. And I'm a visual person, and I'm also a theater person. And at the time, I didn't know that I was, but love watching stories be act out on stage. And so for me to see that as a 4-year-old, it really resonated with me. And I remember when Jesus was being crucified that I understood why he was doing it, and he was doing it for me. And I had an emotional reaction. I started crying, and good parents, they took me out of the theater because they didn't want me to disturb anybody. And so once I calmed down, my dad took me back into the theater, but I was insistent. I told him, I said, when this show is over, I need to go meet Jesus. And so we went through the rest of the story, and Jesus rose from the dead, and I knew he was going to because I had heard it, but it was just exciting to see it. And so we went down, and we were meeting the different cast members, and I went up to Jesus and I asked him, "Oh, did those nails hurt in your hands?" And he explained to me that because he's an actor, they didn't actually do that. It was all pretend, but that Jesus really did do that, and it really did hurt when he had the nails driven into his hands. And so I thought about that for maybe like a day or so. And one night, shortly after, I told my dad, I said, I know that I want Jesus to come into my life. And so my dad helped lead me to the Lord at dinner one time when I was 4. And just a few years later, after having been still consistent in church and attending Awana, I was 6 years old, and we were attending Trinity Baptist Church in Colorado, and that is where I was baptized. My dad got to baptize me. And I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was very, very important for me. I understood what I was doing and why I was doing it, and I was just really excited to be dedicating my life to the Lord and to let everybody know that I was serious about it. I ended up going to a private Christian school starting in 5th grade, and I stayed there all the way through graduation. And so I just was very fortunate to have a really solid foundation and just getting Christianity and theology and even apologetics under my belt as a young person. Something for me that was a big catalyst into how Andrew and I met in our relationship was when I was in high school. I did have a very serious dating relationship with another gentleman, and it was really, really serious. It was a good relationship. I would say it was a good learning experience for me. However, we got very emotionally attached, and I like to talk about it like Paul in the Bible, where he says, "Don't awaken love before it's time." And I feel like we kind of did that emotionally because we were planning on getting married, and I was a senior in high school going into my first year of college, and I was convinced that this was the man that I was going to marry. And we even had started going to what was called pre-engagement counseling with a couple from our church, and just really trying to make sure that that's what we wanted to do. And so that's where my mind was my freshman year of college, is that this was the guy that I was going to marry, and let's get a move on. Let's just go ahead and get engaged and get married. And then just one day out of the blue, this was my perspective, all of a sudden I was told by my sister that we were no longer dating. And it came as a huge shock, and it was a heartbreak because he didn't even talk to me about it when we were planning on getting engaged. And so I was very heartbroken and very upset with the Lord, where here's a moment in my life where it looked like I knew where my life was headed. I saw where the Lord was bringing me, and then it didn't happen. And so I feel like that was one of the first things in my life where something didn't go the way that I was expecting it to. And I had sworn off guys at this time. And so I decided to transfer from the community college in Colorado and get away from where this guy was. And I ended up at Oklahoma Baptist University, and I went there to get a degree, but also praying to the Lord of, I don't want to just to date, but I also need some time to get over this man. And so I prayed and I asked the Lord, I said, please let the next person that I date be my husband. And so because that's where my heart and mind were, I was really not wanting to date yet. And so when I went to Oklahoma Baptist University, I went there to get a degree in theater. And I was excited to be away from home and to learn some new skills. And that is where I will stop. And why don't you share your childhood?
I also grew up in a Christian household in North Carolina, small town of Wake Forest. And I had a middle-class upbringing, lower middle-class upbringing. I had 3 siblings then. I have more now because of adoption, but grew up as the second oldest of 4 and very close in age to my siblings. So the 4 of us, there's only 5 years between the 4 of us. I was always the good kid and just always had that reputation. When I was young, prayed with my parents to receive Christ, but the truth is I always believed. I don't remember not believing. My friends at the school I went to, there weren't a lot of strong believers, and most of my friends, a few of my friends were Christian, but most of them were not. And they were really good buddies of mine. And one year, just as we're hanging out, they got into marijuana, and I resisted for a while. But I wasn't, at this point in my life, while I believed in God, I think I was in a lot of ways coasting on the faith of my parents. And, I always had this reputation as the good kid. And so they were shocked when I finally said, hey, I'll try that. It was really just out of curiosity because I had been around it so many times. And so that kind of kicked off a brief period where I thought, well, let me try rebellion for a little bit, just to kind of see what it's like. And so that lasted for about 9 months or so, and the Lord just wouldn't let me go and kept convicting me of all that stuff. And so finally I confessed my sin to my parents, and which I was terrified to do because they had no idea, as far as I know. And they surrounded me and prayed for me. And I didn't receive any punishment, which is what I was expecting. Instead, I just received a lot of grace. And that really, I've never forgotten that. So my senior year of high school, I decided this has got to turn around. It's time for me to start taking responsibility for my own faith. So I got involved in a Bible study at the school and quickly was in a position of leadership as one of the few upperclassmen. Actually, I was one of only a few guys. It was mostly, there was like 5 girls and only a couple of us guys. And we would do Bible study. We'd do prayer walks in the school in the morning. And it was the very first time in my life when I was really taking a public step of faith, a public display of my faith, and received a little bit of pushback from some people, but that was a critical moment for me. That attitude continued in college. I ended up at OBU in Shawnee and began to think for myself, make my own mistakes, and learn more and more about myself. It really was a critical time in beginning to learn about myself. And that's when I discovered media. I was searching for a major. I didn't know what I wanted to study. And my mom suggested media. And I said, does OBU even have a media program? I mean, it had never occurred to me. And so I jumped in spring of my freshman year and just fell in love with it. I really enjoyed the hands-on aspect, and it was a very practical degree. It wasn't a film theory degree. It was, how do you operate a camera and edit video and produce a project? And then freshman year is when we met.
Yeah, so I was a sophomore transfer to OBU, and I remember it was like the first week that you go, it's welcome week, it's all the fun stuff. There was an event, and so while I was at that event, there was a time where there was some sand volleyball happening, and so my sister, who also was attending OBU, she and I went, and we were just playing some sand volleyball, and had a good time. And I think it was the end of the year when, after you and I had already started dating, that we got the yearbook and we noticed that there's a picture of us from Un Cuerpo playing volleyball, and we're both like up against the net trying to, destroy one another. But so we met then, but we just didn't know it.
Yeah.
But volleyball was the way, even though we didn't know it yet, because we ended up playing like club volleyball or whatever it would be. What was it called?
Yeah, pretty regularly. We played in the wellness center, just pick up volleyball.
Yeah, and so Andrew would be on a team and I'd be on another team, and so we knew of each other, but we'd never really interacted outside of that until one day when we did. My sister and her roommate and me and mine, and then one guy friend, we all wanted to go to dinner in Oklahoma City.
Well, and even before that, I find this so interesting about our story because this was a time in my life when I was trying to figure out how to take responsibility for my own faith, and God was beginning to do new things in me. And so one of the things that I tried to do, I ended up not doing it very often, but it actually played a role in our relationship, was I discovered that OBU had a prayer room.
Yeah.
And so I went there a few times as I was just trying to explore how to pray more intentionally and what are the different ways that I can do this that will be good for me? How do I cut out distraction and all those things? So I was in the prayer room and I didn't know it was you at the time, but you and your sister actually walked in on me at one point.
My sister and I and some of our friends, our Sunday school leader at our church in Shawnee, had just been diagnosed with cancer. And so we wanted to go to the prayer room as a group of ladies to go pray for him. And so we opened the door and you were in there face down on the ground. And you just stood up, because somebody walked in on your moment. You stood up and it looked like you had tears in your eyes. And we were like, oh, sorry. And we just backed away and closed the door and went to go find somewhere else to do that. But I remember that moment. Like it was, at the time, it wasn't anything to think about. But I remember seeing a college guy in the prayer room, very emotional, and I had known you. Like I was like, oh, I know him. I wonder what he's praying about, but then moved on with life. Yeah. The other moment before we officially hung out, I remember seeing you walking across the student center, and you were dressed up in your suit because you were heading out to ROTC. And I was like, oh, wow. He's not in sports clothes. He looks really cute. And then again, just kept going. And so then those were my first two thoughts outside of our hanging out. But yeah, one night we wanted to go have dinner in the city, and our one guy friend, we felt bad that he was the one guy friend. We were like, you need to invite somebody else, another boy, to come with us. And so he's like, well, how about Andrew? And I was like, Andrew, who are you talking about? And he goes, Andrew, the guy we play volleyball with. And I was like, oh yeah. You should tell him that we want him to come. Call him up, tell him we want him to come. And so I didn't know this, but instead of calling you and saying, hey, we want you to come, he was like, hey man, you want to come to dinner? Joy wants you to come.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. He called me. I had just finished dinner with my grandparents. He called me and he was like, hey, you want to come to dinner in Oklahoma City with some friends? I was like, I don't know, dude. I just ate. I'm good, I think. He goes, well, Joy wants you to come. I was like, oh, really?
A girl wants me to come.
Yeah, I can come. I mean, I don't have to eat a lot, but I'll come.
Yeah.
So I came thinking, oh, Joy wants me to be there.
Yeah, not at all. It was just, we need another guy to be there. And so that's when we first hung out though and actually had a conversation.
That was the first of many misunderstandings.
Yeah.
In our story.
We started dating. My junior year, you came out to Colorado to visit right after Christmas and to help drive me back to college. But when you were flying to Colorado, my sisters and I ended up getting a call, and my mom getting a call from my dad's work that he had suffered a heart attack and they took him to the hospital and they needed us to rush up there. And so when we got to the hospital, they said, no, it wasn't a heart attack. It's cancer. That just sounded wacko because how do you go from a heart attack to cancer? But it turns out that he had leukemia, which is a cancer of the blood. And it can look like a heart attack with the pains that you have in your body and losing energy and strength. So my dad had just grabbed his arm because it hurt and fallen at work. And that's kind of how we found out about it. And so I was getting ready to go back to school for my junior year of college for the spring semester. And I just didn't know how serious this was and if I was going to lose my dad or not. And so it was really hard going back to college. And we even had a small conversation where I was like, if my dad's going to die, we should get married before he dies. Because I was really nervous about that and I wanted him to be there. And so junior year was difficult, the rest of junior year, just because I had that looming. But we found out that my dad had chronic myelogenic leukemia, which they said was the more treatable kind. And so he started some chemo by pill and he was changing his diet and all kinds of things. And so quickly after they found the right combination, he went into remission. And so you and I continued to date. And then it was my senior year, is 2012, when we got engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably don't have time to tell the whole story here, but there's a lot to it. We ended up getting engaged at first against your parents' will. And there's a little bit more to that story, but I really felt strongly that it was time for us to get married. And I didn't quite know how to articulate that. It was just a really strong kind of intuition that I thought was from the Lord. We got married quickly, got pregnant just a couple months later.
Yeah.
And you were working full time and I was working part time and finishing up my degree in video production. Then I graduated. 2 weeks later, Samantha was born. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks later, we moved to Georgia to live with my parents in their basement.
We moved in to their basement on our 1-year anniversary with a newborn, a 2-week-old baby.
Yeah.
And then you took off for 2 weeks on a job.
Yeah, I think it was 2 weeks later because I finally got a contract position, which took me out of state on that first job, and I was going to be gone for 2 weeks. And I remember thinking, I have a 4-week-old at home, and I'm now leaving for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so that season of life was characterized by basically 1 2-week job each month. As a contractor, I was working installing video systems, broadcast equipment, and traveling up and down the East Coast a bit.
Yeah, and for me, this was only the beginning of our second year of marriage. We had only been married a year, and within that year, I had been pregnant, like right away. And so it almost felt like we didn't really have much of a honeymoon phase. And so now we're living in my in-laws' basement, which I love my in-laws, and that time was great. However, I wouldn't recommend newlyweds living in your in-laws' basement. Like, it's just, you need your own space. You need to become a couple. And so that just added to some of the stress and the complications that came up in our marriage that year. Having just had your baby on one of the jobs that you had, we went to Virginia and I got to go with you. That is when one morning you were getting ready to go to work and I'm getting Samantha dressed, and you came over and confessed to me that you had been addicted to pornography, not only before our marriage, which I had known about, but I thought that you had put that to rest before we got married, but you had still been dealing with that. And that was really hard to hear. I remember hearing that. The first emotion that came over me was definitely the Holy Spirit. It was just forgiveness. And that's the only way I can describe it. Like, I immediately felt forgiveness towards you, and I didn't feel like hatred or bitterness or anything. That's what I felt. However, at the same time, I did feel hurt and a little bit lied to. The hurt from that lasted a long time. It wasn't necessarily the forgiveness, although I know I worded that later, years later, that I had forgiven you, but it was more just the pain and the way that the enemy used it in our marriage afterwards on my side. Yeah.
I'd been looking at pornography for several years at that point. I had first come across it when I was a teenager and hated that was a reality in my life, but I didn't want. That's not something I wanted you to know about me. I mean, that was my deepest, darkest secret. Mm-hmm. And at one point when we were dating, I told you that I did that, but I had implied that it was done and over with when it wasn't. And I think at the time I had every intention of it being done and over with, and then gave in again and didn't tell you, and that kept going. So at this point, the conviction had just built up so much, similarly to when I was smoking marijuana, the conviction was so strong that I couldn't handle it. I could not handle the conviction. I just couldn't take it anymore. And so I didn't know what else to do except tell you. And it was, that colored that trip for sure.
Yeah.
Not a fun moment.
But I will say, for people who are listening, like, I'm glad you told me. I wouldn't want you to keep that a secret. And I don't think any wife, maybe a wife might say, I don't want to know, but really it is good to get something like that out in the open. And now your spouse can pray for you as you battle that. And even though it's a painful thing, because I remember saying to you, you realize that this, like, you did commit adultery, even though there's not physically another woman. To look at another woman with lust in your eyes is adultery. And that's what Scripture says. That's what Jesus said. And I know you knew that. So it was definitely a painful thing, but I'm glad that you told me that.
It was this death spiral for me, because I hated that I did it. I knew it was wrong, and yet I still didn't know how to get out of it. And so I felt trapped in that sin. And it took a long time for me to really, truly be free of that. It was a long battle, and it really was a battle to get out of that.
Yeah.
That wasn't something that just cleared up overnight. But what changed over the years was I've had several guys that I've been able to go to hold me accountable, and confess. And then as in my own spiritual growth, the Lord taught me a lot about myself and about sin, the nature of sin, and who He is through that struggle. And so a lot of good came out of that in my own spiritual walk, but it was not, that is not a battle I would choose for anybody, for sure.
Right. But on my journey, this was the next thing that I thought my marriage was going to be a specific way, because I was this good Christian girl who stayed pure until marriage. And so I felt like, my marriage is going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. We're not going to have any issues. And so here's a big issue. And so this was the next thing in my life that was something that didn't go the way that I thought it would.
Didn't meet expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. So from there, I ended up getting a job in Colorado, a full-time job, because the one I was working was contract and I needed benefits and we needed to get out of my parents' house. So we moved to Colorado. The Lord started to do something new in my heart when I was at that company. The building was located right next to a park, and there were walking paths behind it. And so this was the first time in my life. When we moved out there, it was 2014. So I was 23, working my first big boy job. I was walking during my 15-minute break. I would walk through the park to get some fresh air. And I remember one time I felt very distinctly, very clearly, the Holy Spirit say, "You see that lady right there? Go tell her about me." And I never experienced something like that before. This was the first time when I sensed the Holy Spirit telling me, directing me to do something in that moment immediately. It wasn't about some calling on my life or who I'm going to be or kind of general sanctification. This was a very clear instruction about something specific to do right now. I was terrified. Oh man, I was terrified. I tried to get out of it. I was arguing with the Holy Spirit for several minutes, trying to make excuses. And I almost walked back to the office and did not obey until I stopped and finally realized I'm going to regret this if I don't do it. And so I approached the lady and I didn't know what to say because I'd never done this before. And I just said, "Hey, excuse me, ma'am, do you know Jesus?" And she said, "No, thank you. I'm good." And she walked off. And that was the whole interaction. And I went back to my office and I had this surge of energy. And I was like, "This is awesome. What is going on here?" And all I wanted to do was go back to the park and keep trying to talk to people. And so there was a period of about 3 weeks where on my walk, the Holy Spirit was guiding me to do that with several people. Most of the conversations didn't go anywhere. One guy brought up the problem of evil, and that was his quip. I said, "Do you know Jesus?" He said, "You know what? I don't know how God can let bad things happen to good people." And I didn't know what to say. I had heard that before, but I
were in a serious conversation.
Yeah, and I never practiced that. So I didn't know how to respond. So that kind of ended the conversation. Another guy didn't speak English, so we didn't talk. A few people I had extended conversations with. One guy even complimented me, said, "Hey, you're good at this." Thanks. I don't know what I'm doing. But every time I didn't know what to say, so I would just start the conversation. Do you know Jesus? Can I tell you about Jesus? And so God was doing something new in my heart there to point me toward, to turn my heart, open me up to evangelism and apologetics, even though I didn't know the term apologetics at the time.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the first step in a spiritual formation process that God's been doing in me since. I was at that job for about 2.5 years before the company closed down, and I got a new job. But before we get into that, why don't you share?
Yeah, okay. So that was around 2014, 2015. And so my dad, he ended up, with cancer, you can go up and down, you can be in and out of remission. And so that's kind of the journey that my dad was on. He would be doing really good and be in remission, and then something would happen, and all of a sudden he would need to find a new cancer drug because that one would just stop working and the cancer would come back. And so there was a time at the end of 2014 when my dad got sick with just a regular infection. And that's the thing with leukemia, is that you can die from like a common cold. And so he had gotten an infection in his arm and landed in the hospital in September of 2014. And we thought that at that point that he was going to pass away because it had gotten so bad. Nothing that the doctors did was helping. And we even had family members fly in and just to say their goodbyes. And we really thought that was the moment that we were going to lose him. But through prayer, from all kinds of people that we knew around the world and just our friends who are local, my dad was able to pull through miraculously. And we had just a few more months with him. And at the time I was pregnant with my son, Benjamin. And so in March of 2015, it was rather sudden. My parents had gone out of the state to find care somewhere else. And we thought that this was finally the answer that we had been working towards for a long time. And so my mom and dad were by themselves off at a different clinic when all of a sudden the worst happened and my dad went downhill very, very quickly. And the details of his death are quite traumatic. His blood cells ended up going what's called blast, where his white blood cells were produced so rapidly that they were very, very much mutated. He couldn't fight anything. His kidneys, he was going into kidney failure and liver failure, and his white blood cells, they couldn't even stick together and clot. And so the end of his life was very, very rapid, so rapid, in fact, that he didn't have morphine, and it was very painful and a very hard thing for my mom to have to watch. And so I lost my dad at 17 days postpartum with my son. And that was just very difficult because, first of all, us girls, we weren't able to be there with my mom. We weren't able to be there together and to mourn together and to watch that happen. Not that we wanted to. My mom, she has told us the details of my dad's passing, and in a very big way, I'm happy that I didn't see that, but I'm very sad that I wasn't able to be there for her. And so, yeah, losing my dad was just the next thing in my life that was kind of a disappointment and didn't go the way that we thought, or that I thought it was going to go. We thought that he was going to get better. It was a really difficult thing to have to go through. And it kind of felt like, at least in that first year after my dad had passed, that I had lost both parents because my mom was very changed. and she was very depressed. It was just, it was hard.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of hard things that come with that.
So during that time, though, we were also really, really active in our church. Mm-hmm. And I was on the worship team, and you were the media guy. Mm-hmm. And that's also when you switched jobs.
Yeah, I switched to, so my company that I worked for was closing down, and I got a new job as a digital marketing manager for a medium-sized business, and was surrounded for the first time, basically for the first time, by almost all unbelievers. There was one other believer in my office, and we actually went to church together, who was in my Sunday school class. And there were a couple others who professed faith, but I'm just not sure. So this was very, very different. I worked with Jehovah's Witness, and I started having conversation. This was the first time, because I was in this environment, I was actively looking for ministry opportunities in the office. I was on the lookout for ways that I could pray for my coworkers, that I could say, hey, can I pray with you about that? Or inviting them to church, or trying to encourage them to go to church, or to read their Bible, or to pray, or whatever. And so in the conversations that I struck up with my Jehovah's Witness coworker, that sparked in me this new interest in apologetics. Because we'd have conversation, not debate, we're not arguing, I'm just asking her questions about her faith. That's pretty much how the conversations went for many months, just me asking her questions. And I would go home, and she would ask me questions on occasion, and I realized pretty quickly, I don't know how to defend my faith. Mm-hmm. Some of it, I don't even know how to explain it.
Yeah.
I don't know how to put it into words. Like, I'm firm in what I believe. There's no doubt happening. But I don't know how to articulate it to somebody else, and I don't know how to answer the question, well, why do you believe that? I don't know. So I fell in love with apologetics. I fell in love with the doctrine of the Trinity. It's still my favorite thing to study and think through. And I became very passionate about figuring out, how do I explain this to somebody else? What I've learned is it requires a certain level of understanding to believe something, but it requires an even deeper level of understanding to then be able to say it back to somebody in a way that they can understand it.
Yeah.
And so I started seeking that deeper level of understanding in a lot of different areas of my faith, and I'm studying the Bible in ways that I'd never studied the Bible before. I'd pretty much done quiet times before, and I'd gone to church. I'd never done any personal study.
Yeah.
And this was new.
And I remember that when you started doing that, I mean, of course I noticed, and I had asked you, hey, do you think that you might be called to the ministry? Well, then our pastors at church started asking you the same question. And then one day our pastor asked you again, and you said, I don't know.
I don't know. And it was the first time that I didn't have an instinctual rejection of the idea. And I thought, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so he was at the time a trustee at Southwestern Seminary in Fort Worth.
And he jumped on that.
And he said, we'll give you gas money to drive down to Fort Worth and go visit campus. Mm-hmm. So that's what we did. We stayed with some friends we had in Fort Worth.
At this time, we have 3 kids.
Mm-hmm. And we went to an event on campus for prospective students, and we did a tour, and I sat in an apologetics class with one of the professors there, and tried to put myself as much in seminary life as I could in a single day. And we left that trip, we talked on the way home, and decided we think this is the next thing for us.
That was a place that when we've stepped on campus, I felt like this is home. We need to come here.
Yeah. That was in March of 2017. And so August 1st or July 31st or something of 2017, we packed up all our stuff from Denver and moved on campus to Fort Worth.
Yeah.
And we didn't know, we knew one couple in Fort Worth, and they were not at the seminary. They just happened to live there. And so we pretty much moved to a new spot, didn't know anybody,
and
started a new life there. And we loved seminary. there were some very hard moments because we were flat broke for 4 years. And we were broke, but I just ate it up. I couldn't get enough reading. I'd never loved reading before until I discovered apologetics and theology, and I just loved it. The Lord helped me so many times to find a connection in my class to something that I could be passionate about, so that I could value each class and it wouldn't be drudgery. And I thrived. So many great experiences there. The Lord tested our resolve in a lot of ways to follow in obedience. And but the big thing that came out of that, the big question when you go to seminary is, what's after seminary? What are you preparing for? So I was pursuing a Master's of Divinity, which is a generic ministry degree, because I didn't know what I was doing next. So I didn't want to get too specific, but we felt the call to missions to be missionaries. And so we eventually decided, felt that the Lord had been leading us to Germany, to be missionaries in Germany. And so we began the application process with the International Mission Board, and that's a very long process. It's very comprehensive if you're not familiar with it. And so they told us, expect that it will take a year, and they're going to examine pretty much every part of your life, because since the IMB funds all their missionaries, they want to make sure that their money is a wise investment in a family that's going to stay on the mission field.
In a family that's well supported. They want you to be well supported.
So
and they also require, because since we were not going to go just for short term, we were going to go career and live the rest of our life overseas. I also had requirements within seminary. So I got to take a couple of seminary courses as well.
Yeah. One of the key things for me was we had to keep an evangelism log. And so we had to keep track of all the times that we were sharing the gospel, because they wanted to know, if we're going to send you on the mission field to plant churches, we need to know that you care about sharing the gospel now where you are, that this is something that you're already doing. So we ramped up our efforts in evangelism in Fort Worth. And so I would go out every other week with a group to an apartment complex full of refugees, and we just knock on doors, and did that every other Friday. We had some online ministries where we were sharing the gospel, and I really fell in love with evangelism as a result of that process. So as we were getting near the end of our application, we had pretty much finished the process, and as far as we knew, we were pretty much accepted. We just had to officially declare where we wanted to go and officially be matched with a team.
Yeah.
We began to get rid of stuff and sell some things and pare down, because we knew how much we were going to be allowed to take overseas. And so we knew we had to get rid of things. So we begun that process.
We were only months away from going to training, which then after that would be flying to Germany.
Yeah. And so we just had one final step. We had to attend this online conference so that we could officially be matched with a team.
And this is 2020.
And COVID had already been going. And when we were on the road, we were going to go stay with my parents so they could watch our kids, so that we could attend the online sessions. On the highway, I got a call from our application consultant, and he said, "Hey, I have to uninvite you to this conference because you've not been approved, and I thought you had, but you haven't." And that launched us into a period of time when we were basically told, you're going to have to wait and try again next year. And we did not agree with that. We didn't agree with their reasoning. It wasn't due to any moral failure. There were just some red flags that they determined would make it difficult for our family to acclimate to a foreign culture and language learning and stuff like that. And so we disagreed, and we pled our case, and they said, "I'm sorry, we're not going to approve you. You need to try again next year." Yeah. Long story short, we really wrestled with this. I mean, this was devastating news. We had oriented our whole life at this point toward going overseas pretty much for the rest of our life.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that was no longer an option. And it felt like a door just slammed shut in our face.
Yeah.
and broke our nose. I mean, this really was devastating. And so we're left reeling from that. And I now can't finish my degree because going on the mission field was part of my degree. I am no longer going to be employed, and I had lost my job because of COVID. So now I've got to find something else full time. And the kids have been in and out of school, and that was impacted by all this. And so we had to we had to collect ourselves and start over in pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And so I switched to a regular missions degree, and we didn't know what to do, but I just kind of sensed in the moment that God did not want me to job hunt, but wanted me to wait on him. And so it was a week or so later that Pastor Michael called me. Pastor Michael is my uncle. If you don't know that, we share a last name. And so he's my dad's brother. So he heard through the family news that we were no longer going to the mission field, and he called and said, hey, we could use a media person because COVID has made that pretty clear. And they had a media team, but had never had anyone devoted to leading that team specifically. So we began the interview process, and I switched to online classes because we were anticipating potentially moving off campus. And in September of 2020, we moved to Tulsa rather rapidly, and I started at Evergreen October 1st.
Yeah.
And so I finished. It took me another year and a half. I graduated with my MDiv in 2021, December of 21. Finally wrapped that up. It took me 4.5 years to do that degree. And we started our journey in Tulsa, which for me is where some of the deepest, most painful spiritual lessons have come in my life.
I had never dealt with anxiety or depression before. Anxiety started to creep up in college in some small ways, but it just, I always thought maybe it's just I was a little nervous or something, but I had never had to deal with that. I was always the life of the party, the happy one, the one who was always smiling. People would be like, your name is Joy? Oh, of course, you are a joy. You're always smiling. You bring light into the room whenever you come in. I would hear those things all the time. And so when we moved here, it was really shocking to me, which I think only helped make this worse when I entered into a time of depression, because I didn't know how to handle it. And it wasn't my personality to be depressed and to be quiet and to act shy and to not know how to make friends. It's always really easy for me to make friends. It was always easy. And so that change for me and you coming to work was awful. I mean, just to be honest, a lot of times, even on the Grove podcast, but if you just walk around Evergreen and you ask people how they came here, the story that I hear the most is I stepped on campus, we walked through those doors, and immediately I felt like I was at home. These are my people. It was a breath of fresh air. And for me, it wasn't that. And so every time I would hear that story, it would also, again, feel like, well, what's wrong with me? This isn't my place. I don't want to be here. It was really hard. There would be some Sundays where I couldn't even stand up for worship. I would just be, because of your job, you're the media guy, I would be in service all by myself. I would go to Sunday school all by myself because you were busy. And so I felt all by myself. And so there would just be times where I'd just be weeping in church, and nobody would ask me about it. And that's not the fault of anybody. I hid it. I would try to hide it. Everybody here has been great and has been very friendly and inviting and loving. But because I was in depression, I didn't see it. Instead, my anxiety that I had, when people would look at me, what my brain would tell me and what the enemy would tell me is, they're annoyed with you. They hate you. Don't talk to them. those people, they're only being nice because you're a pastor's wife, but they don't actually like you. So the first a lot of years of us being here have been that way. And I've slowly been trying to learn how to deal with that, and through prayer and Bible reading and on my own, I couldn't do it. And it got so bad that I wasn't suicidal. There wasn't like any plan, and I didn't want to harm myself, but I did have the thoughts of, if something happens to me, great, then my journey is over. I can go to heaven, and Andrew and the kids will be so much better off. He can find a new wife who will love the kids and take care of them a lot better than me, and who can support him a lot better than I can. And so, Lord, if that's what you want to do, fine by me. If not, then I'll just keep doing this thing.
Yeah. So while all of that's going on, I had no idea. I knew that it would take a while for you to find community, because we had done this before, where we go to a new place and it takes time for you to make friends. I get that. Before I share my story, I knew that it would take a while. It was taking way longer than I expected, and I didn't know why. I thought, like, something's wrong here. I don't know what it is, but this should not be this hard. And so eventually I tried to have conversations with you. I tried to take a listening posture, and finally I was like, I got to step in. Like, I can't just keep listening and never, like, there's the joke, men offer solutions and women just want them to listen. I needed to offer solutions. It was time to change things. And so I was nervous about that conversation, but I really tried to approach it prayerfully, and because it was time for things to change. And so I approached you, I think more than once even. I think it was a series of conversations where I said, I don't know what's happening, but I know that it doesn't need to be this way. So let's talk about solutions. How do we move forward here?
Yeah.
We had a few of those. And I think that's when things started to improve for you. It wasn't overnight. Yeah. And I think in some ways that journey is you're still in that journey.
Yeah.
But
it's
you're
a lot better.
You're certainly not where you were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember the first time, this is what I heard. I don't think this is actually what you said, but what I heard was, that's enough. And I was like, yes, sir.
Well, that was the tone that I think I took on purpose. Yeah. But I was praying hard about that, because I was trying not to be mean about it. Right. But I didn't know what else it was time to change. Yeah. And so I honestly didn't know what to do. I was very much lost in it. To hear that's enough from your husband that you love and you trust, and you see that he's growing in the Lord, I trusted that. And it literally felt like, when you said that, like, it felt like this black cloud was lifted from my brain, and all of a sudden I could see. And it was just weird. And it wasn't like immediately everything was all better, right, but I didn't feel like I was suffocating. Yeah. Now, husbands who are listening, you have to be really careful if you're going to go into a conversation with that tone. I had spent so much time in prayer about that. And I felt like that's what needed to be said, but I tried hard not to be mean about it. I just knew that something needed to change. It was time for things to change. Yeah. On my own journey, like I said, this has been probably the most tumultuous spiritual part of my, spiritual journey coming to Evergreen. I started struggling with things that I had never had before. And so there were things that started creeping up in my mind that took me about 3 years to work through and to get out of. I say work through. I needed the Lord to pull me out of this. But I started listening to lies from the enemy, the things that were just screaming in my head that I didn't know how to escape were, you're not the right guy for the job. because I didn't feel a strong call to ministry that I could articulate well. I just felt like at the time the Lord had opened up this door and this was the next thing for us, but I still couldn't articulate a clear call to ministry. I felt like I was all alone. No one saw me. No one understood what I did. No one cared. I felt like I didn't have any meaningful support. And that's not a critique of the staff at Evergreen. That was the enemy spinning, distorting reality in my own mind. Because even though I didn't have a team working with me in media, on staff, everyone has their own lane. They're all doing their own things and they're all working really hard and they're good at what they do. Media was my lane. And I knew that I didn't have, enough bandwidth to handle all of the responsibility that was on my plate. And I didn't know how to deal with that because I didn't have any help. I didn't have any consistent help in the tasks. And so that led to the thought, I'm a failure and I can't do my job well. I don't have what it takes to do this well. And those thoughts, I'm alone, I don't have what it takes, led to I'm not the right guy. And for the first time in my life, I was thinking to myself, I should quit. I need to quit my job.
See, what's interesting to me is you and I were under the same attack.
Yes.
Because those lies were the exact lies that I was hearing, but in the context of mom and wife. And instead of quitting, it was, Lord, just take me home.
Yeah. I didn't know how to handle it. I was spiraling out of control and I tried to put on a good face, but there were either distinct moments that I can remember vividly where I was not paying attention to what was happening around me in meetings or whatever. All I was thinking about was, what the heck am I doing here? Why am I here? I can't do my job. I'm failing all over the place. All I'm doing is messing things up and I shouldn't be here. And so that led to the worship team had heard about this conference at Passion City Church in Atlanta, and they went the next year, and I went with them to scope it out to see if I could bring my media leadership team. And I didn't know ahead of time what God was going to do at that conference. But this was, aside from salvation itself, this was the most radical spiritual experience of my life. And I've had some wild experiences. This was, again, I'm going into this with these lies swirling in my head. So we got there, we flew into Atlanta, and I remember being distracted in the first sessions by the production. And again, I'm thinking, man, I will never get Evergreen to where Passion City Church is, to their level of production, the quality. I'm looking around thinking, comparing what I am able to do at Evergreen with what they're doing, going, we're so far from this. We'll never get there. I'm not the guy for this. And so these lies are continuing in my head. And at one point, we went to dinner that first day, and I had Pastor Zach pray for me. I said, listen, my head's not in this. There's this barrier up and I can't focus. Will you just pray for me? And so we prayed outside the restaurant where we were. And man, the next day, or that evening, for the evening session after dinner is when just the Lord poured himself out. And it's hard to describe because, there were several revelations for me. One was the song. I'd never heard the song Fall Like Rain before. And there was a line in there, man, never lose the wonder of your presence. May I always stand in awe of who you are. The beauty and the gift of your friendship. That line, the beauty and the gift of your friendship, that just captured my attention. Because I thought they were singing that. When I hear a new song, I just listen to it. I don't sing along first because I'm analyzing it. Do I agree with this song? And I said, Lord, I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means to be in friendship with you. And over the course of the conference, which was only a few days, there wasn't a single moment where the Lord did this, but he just spoke some very clear words to me. And basically showed me how personal and intimate his presence is, but there were no crazy expressions. There was no like charismatic experiences with this. None of that. It was just an intensely personal encounter with God. And I came away feeling like I had experienced for the first time in my life what it meant to be in friendship with God and to have this intimate personal relationship with the God of the universe, who's not merely my Lord and Savior, but he's with me, he's in me, he's personal. He wants to know me and fill me with his presence. And it was really difficult to describe, but it was life-changing. It changed my quiet times. It changed the way that I pray. It changed the way that I worship, because now God was not just the God of the universe, but he was the God who's in me and next to me. He's personal. I'm in relationship with him now. He was more real to me. And so a verse that the Lord used, he didn't answer all of my struggles all the lies that I was dealing with. But in my quiet time one day at the conference, I was reading in Ephesians, and I read Ephesians 1 verses 20 through the end of the chapter were really impactful. And he says, it's in his thanksgiving and prayer for the Ephesians. And he says, according to the work of his great might that he worked in Christ when he raised him from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places, far above all rule and authority and power and dominion, and above every name that is named, not only in this age, but also in the one to come. And he put all things under his feet and gave him as head over all things to the church, which is his body. And the Lord spoke to me very clearly that day and said, I am in charge of all things, and I have put you at Evergreen, and I don't make mistakes. And it was just this quiet moment in my time with the Lord one morning before sessions ever started, that the Lord said, I put you there, and I don't make mistakes. And it was just this moment where the Lord basically said, sit down, shut up, and trust me. Yeah. And it blew my mind, and it just ended the question of, should I quit? I mean, that was not a problem. And there were some other things he spoke to me through the speakers that week, that it's okay that I didn't have a clear call to ministry. Like, that was okay. I didn't need that. The question was, am I where God wants me to be? And the Lord just gave me a peace, and basically I let go of that as well. That stopped being an issue. What happened after that was I came home on this spiritual high. Yeah. And there was a moment when I remember driving home from work one day really soon after the conference, listening to worship music, and I was crying in my car for the first time ever. It was the first time I'd ever cried just thinking about God and listening and worshiping in the car. That had never happened to me before.
Yeah, you're not a crier.
I'm not a crier. And I came home crying. There's another moment where I had unconfessed sin. I had never experienced brokenness over my sin like this before, but I confessed some sin to you, and this was different. This wasn't just remorse. And before, there was true repentance in other times when I confessed sin, but this was deeper than that. I didn't know how to communicate all of that to you adequately.
Well, I saw it. I could see the difference, yeah.
But I was genuinely broken, and that changed my perspective on a lot. And so then I was, for a few months, I was on this spiritual high. Yeah.
But that made me mad. Being on a spiritual high made me mad, because before you left for that conference, we actually miscarried our 5th child. It was Valentine's Day. And we were very, very early. But we lost a baby, and I had never had a miscarriage before. And this is after having gone through years of now depression, and my health was also really weird. And so this was like the tip of the iceberg for the health issues that was going on, is where my body couldn't keep the baby. And so then you went off to this conference and came back on the spiritual high, and I'm still really, really struggling. Even though the cloud was off, like I could see better, the depression was still there. For me, God was still very much faithful, and I knew he was within that, because I had a really great foundation, and I knew the answers. And God would remind me quietly of the answers of what I needed to hear. I wanted him to be louder, and that was part of my depression, is I felt like he was quiet. He was still speaking though. And so like in those moments where I would hear a lie, immediately the answer against that lie would come to mind. But I'd be a little bit mad that the answer would come because I wanted to wallow in my depression a little bit. And that's how I survived though, those years. And even though it wasn't like this deep, strong experience that you had, I had this soft, quiet relationship with the Lord that was still there because of the foundation that my parents had given me as a kid and throughout college. I knew the truth and I knew what was right, and I knew that God wasn't done with me. Even though I was like, I'd be okay with it if you took me, I knew he wasn't done with me because I was still there. And I knew that I was the mom for my kids because he gave them to me. I knew I was the wife for you because he gave you to me. He gave me to you. And so I knew those things, but it was all very quiet. So anyway, you come back and you're like on this, I know very clearly because God was really loud. And I was a little bit mad and jealous of like, why does he always get to be the one that goes off? And here's God so strongly. And I have to be here by myself crying.
Yeah. After the first few months back from the conference, I started to spiral again. And this time, so the Lord had spoken very clearly to me about some of those lies, but not all of them. Some of them I was still dealing with. I still felt alone, and I still felt like a failure. I knew I'm where God wants me to be, and also I don't have what it takes. I'm not succeeding in my job. I'm not doing well. We're falling down all over the place. I'm dropping the ball all over the place. The rest of that year, I was just spiraling further and further downhill mentally and just drowning again. But this time, I felt like I got even lower than before. And I was trying to push forward in media stuff, media initiatives, and keep things going. But in my head, it was even worse. And it all culminated the last week of the year. I stayed up later than everybody else. And I was crying out to the Lord outside, and just finally the Lord dealt with that. And he brought to mind the story of Peter walking on the water. And so I read it, and just very gently, the Lord said, I've been here the whole time. Just like Peter took his eyes off of me and started drowning, I was right next to him to pull him out. I'm right next to you, ready to pull you out. I've never left. I haven't gone anywhere. You just stopped looking at me. That was a very gentle correction that brought me a lot of peace. It still didn't answer all my questions, but I just had this peace that, okay, whatever happens, the Lord is with me. The other thing that changed that made a significant difference was a few weeks before, in December, there was some rearranging among the staff and roles and responsibilities. And so I was now put underneath Philip Jackson. And so he and I started meeting, and the first few times we now meet weekly, and it's great. And he's mentoring me in a lot of ways. But the first few times we met, I just unloaded, I just dumped all of my junk on him. I said, here is what I'm dealing with. Here's my job. Let me explain to you everything that happens under my purview. And he was wide-eyed. Like he told me I had no idea.
Yeah.
In explaining things to Philip, he helped me to offload some of my responsibilities and make a plan for other responsibilities that I couldn't yet offload, but we knew that we wanted to move in that direction. The other person that I had similar conversations with at the same time was AJ, Pastor AJ. And he had the same response. I had no idea that you were dealing with this stuff. Let me help you with some of this. And so the two of them together made a huge difference in my load. And I still have a full load, and I would still love to be able to pass off things, but it became more bearable because I knew someone sees me. Someone now understands. People understand now who can actually do something about it. I didn't just want somebody to say, "Oh, you poor guy."
Yeah.
I wanted someone to say, "I understand. Let me help you. Here's what I can do to step in to your situation and pray with you and see if I can take a few of these tasks off your plate, or let's find someone else who can." That made a tremendous difference. And 2024 and forward has been different because of all of that. The Lord spoke clearly to me, and he brought people into proximity with me who were able to make a big difference.
Yeah.
So 2024 was a very different year. I had never been so eager for New Year's Day as I was for 2024, January 1. But things turned around, and those lies, they no longer held me down. And even though I have still been overwhelmed in a lot of my responsibilities, it's been different. Yeah. And there's still a lot of challenges, as there is with almost every job. I'm not special or unique in that sense. But the Lord made it very clear, I'm with you. I'm going to help you through this. I'm going to get you where I want you to be. So where I'm at now is there's been this year has been hard for completely new reasons, but the Lord has been teaching me, how do I lead my wife and my family intentionally? And that's hard. As the leader of the home, it's difficult because I've got to keep in mind the goal. And sometimes the most direct route to get there is not the right route. Sometimes you've got to do things differently in order to get to where you want to be. And it's not manipulative. It's just an acknowledgement of reality. And so there's a lot that goes into that, but it's hard work. Being a husband and a father is hard, just like being a wife and a mother is hard. It's just plain hard.
What do you know?
And so I've been really trying to improve, and it's a battle. There's a lot of spiritual warfare around that. The latest simple lesson I'm trying to learn, I say simple, it's really hard for me, but the simple thing is putting my phone away and not staring at my screen so much. That's going to make a really big difference, I believe.
Yeah, so 2024 was a good year, I think, for both of us. I feel like that's when my cloud was really starting to come off a lot more. I had been working a lot on making connections and trying to fight through the lies of that nobody wanted to be friends with me and to do it anyway. And so one thing that I had started doing, I started being discipled by Marilyn Osborne. It's exactly what I needed in that time. And she just helped me a lot and encouraged me to keep going and to keep fighting and to get into the Word again, and be consistent with that. And so 2024 was a good year. Things really have changed a lot. I've been starting to find my footing with relationships and with where is my place at Evergreen. I started thinking about doing the podcast in 2023. And the Lord had given me that idea in the fall. And so I had presented it to a few people. I just really had a desire to use my degree. I had done a couple of children's theater programs here at the church, but I wanted to have a consistent way to serve within my degree at the church. And so I started thinking about the name and the theme and the logo and all that stuff in the fall of 2023. But in 2024 is when I finally started doing the recordings. Michael said, sure, go ahead. Let's try that. Why don't you produce a couple of episodes and let me listen to them, and we'll see if it's something that we want to do. And so we produced about 5 for him to listen to. And once he gave the thumbs up, then we started releasing. And that's been so good for me personally. Just having a place that I felt like I could make a difference. I'm just really grateful for the people who have been on before now, and who have agreed to meet with me after this, that they trust me with their stories. And I'm just really grateful also to Michael for letting us do that.
The way that as I was thinking about, you typically ask your guests, what would you say to someone who's been through what you have been through? We've been through so many different things. I don't know if there's a way to categorize our life into a single theme. But some of the biggest lessons that God has shown me, especially in the last 4 years, that he's really solidified in my mind, are that God is sovereign over all things, and he always works on purpose. I can try to respond in a way that says, okay, what's the lesson here? What do I need to learn? How do I need to grow because of what's happening, or in order to make it through what has happened? Because God has something for me here. There's something I need to take away from this. And sometimes it takes a while for me to see it, but he is always faithful to show it to me in his timing. And the other thing that is continuously difficult is because of those things, I need to remain faithful in whatever place he's put me until he moves me somewhere else.
When I was younger, Christianity felt a little bit like a formula of, if you do this and you live your life this way, then the Lord will bless you in this way. And also, I think part of it is being an American, having, this Western world view of, do these things and you're going to move up in life, and your life is going to turn out in this certain way. And so when my life started having those moments where things didn't turn out the way that I thought they would, like with my relationship in high school, and then ending up at OBU where I didn't think I was going to go, and losing my dad to cancer at a really young age, and then our IMB thing with when COVID happened and not going to Germany, all of those things added up together to really take me out. It took me out. The truth that I have been learning is that God has been there the whole time. It's like what you were saying, God has been there the whole time, and I just needed to look up, and he is in control of the journey. When we get to where the Lord wants us to go and we turn around and look, the path was so clear, and he made it happen, and it was his purpose and his plan the whole time. And it's hard to hear that as maybe like a teenager and be like, oh yeah, God's good, I can trust him. It's very different going through it, and learning those lessons and turning my knowledge, the good foundation that I had, into not just a head knowledge, but a heart knowledge, because now I've been through those things that I always knew as a kid, and now I know it for myself. Don't give up. Don't lose the knowledge and the good foundation that you have. Just know that the Lord is going to solidify that knowledge that you have of him and the truths about him. And it might hurt to learn those lessons, but it's okay because God will be there the whole time. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you would like more information about our church, please visit our website at evergreenbc.org.